Collectivism sounds very nice when people talk to you about it. Collectivism is the idea that everything really belongs to everybody. And the reason you need a government is to distribute it fairly. And that just sounds sweet when you say it in a casual way to someone over a drink. Everyone has needs. Everyone has ideas of how other people don't need everything they have, and it just seems fair. And it can be described in a very sweet way, that the individual really should be sacrificed for the collective, for the group, for the welfare of everybody. And many societies throughout history have agreed with this idea. This is the way everything used to be organized. This is sacrifice. This is child sacrifice. The Incas, 500 years ago. That is a beautiful 10-year-old girl who was dragged up to the top of a mountain in the Andes, fed alcohol, hit on the back of the head, and left to die of exposure. The practice of child sacrifice for the good of the group, for the good of the community. They really believed that. They believed that sacrificing this child to the gods of the mountain when there was an earthquake or a drought or a famine would make things better for the collective group, for the good of society. And they took this 10-year-old girl and many others to the top of a mountain and left her to die. Sacrifice. Sacrifice. The sacrifice of the individual for the good of the community. This is a very visual expression of it, but it's not the only expression of it. The whole world was organized this way until the 18th century. In the 18th century, something new happened. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was a revolutionary concept. The idea that a country would be founded on the rights of the individual, not on the welfare of the society or the good of the group, no matter how you define the group, by sect, by tribe, by religion, by state, by country. The individual person has rights, and the purpose of government is to secure these rights. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's a completely new way to look at things. That changed everything. This is from the Declaration of Independence. And these ideas come from Blackstone's fundamental rights, from English law. This is Sir William Blackstone. The absolute rights of individuals, the fundamental rights of Englishmen. This is the foundation of the ideas that built the United States. Life, liberty, property. You'll notice that in the Declaration of Independence they said the pursuit of happiness. That's important too. The idea that a government would be put in place to secure happiness. Not welfare, not health, not safety, happiness. That's philosophically very different. And it comes from English law. And we are the first country in the history of human civilization to be founded on the idea that individuals have the right to their own life, their own freedom, their own happiness, and their own property, no matter what anybody else thinks about it. This changed everything. Two opposite philosophies. Collectivism is the idea of community responsibility. And individual rights is the idea of freedom. And where does that take you if you follow it to its logical conclusion? This is from Isabel Patterson, who was a libertarian writer in the 1940s. And this is from The God of the Machine, which is a way of looking at production of wealth as an engineering problem. How do you set the structure? How do you set the structure? She said nations are not powerful because they have land, ports, navies. They have these things because they have found the correct principles for a political structure that allows the flow of energy to take its proper course. So let's look at what you get when you start with individual rights. You get freedom based on voluntary action, limited government, individual responsibility, and you end with economic growth. When you start with collectivism, the idea that the community is responsible, right away you go to compulsion. Right away you're ordering some people to do things for the benefit of other people, because they're not going to do it voluntarily. If they were doing it voluntarily, you'd be over here with individual rights, but you're not. Community responsibility, the government enforces it. You start with compulsion. You have to coerce the action of people to do things, in order for them to take care of each other as the government says they ought to. You wind up with government force when coercion isn't enough. And where does that lead you economically? Stagnation. It leads you to stagnation. You've reversed the incentives. Instead of being rewarded for effort, you're penalized for effort, and you're rewarded for your needs and not for your production. You reverse the incentives, and gradually you have stagnation. That's where collectivism takes you. And this is why under individual rights, the United States became the most economically successful country in the history of civilization. A level of economic progress that can be seen in skyscrapers as opposed to horses and buggies. Things changed rapidly after the United States was founded, because when you reverse the incentives and you reward production and you reward effort and people can keep the fruits of their own effort, everything changes. And that's what happens. Collectivism is stagnation, and individual rights leads you to economic growth. Let's look at the continuum with some of the different forms of government on it. These are terms that are probably more familiar than collectivism. Communism, these are the Merriam-Webster dictionary definitions. They're not my definitions. A theory advocating elimination of private property, a system in which goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed. I think we can safely put that over on the collectivism side. Let's look at another one. Socialism. Any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution. Not much debate there. That goes over here on the collectivism side. Let's look at fascism. Adolf Hitler already explained to us that they are interested in collectivism. And this is interesting. It exalts nation and often race. The idea that a race is a collective is something that's not economic, but it's still collectivism. The idea that you can penalize or reward someone on the basis of race does not help the other members of that race or hurt the other members of that race. It's a collective way of looking at rights instead of an individual way of looking at rights. To talk about race or class is not individual. That's something we can get back to later. So fascism, dictatorship, harsh control, definitely over on the side with collectivism. Coerced action, seriously coerced action. The welfare state is in the middle. The welfare state is what you have when the government believes it is responsible for the economic and social welfare of all its citizens, and primary responsibility does not belong to the individual, it belongs to the government. And so that we can put purplish in the middle here. The idea of welfare being a good thing, a benevolent thing, is belied by the fact that you're still having to compel someone to pay the bill for it. And the government has to use force at some level, and it manifests in very high taxes, like in the European countries. Capitalism, on the other hand, is an economic system characterized by private ownership or corporate ownership, by investments determined by private decision, voluntary, not coerced, not government-owned. That goes over on the individual rights side. Capitalism is the economic system of a free country. That's what it is. It's what you have when you don't do anything to stop it. Where are we now in the United States? And where are we headed with the policies that are being proposed for us or enacted? I would argue that none of us are all the way over at full individual rights in the political process anymore. The Republicans have moved to the left of capitalism, and the Democrats have moved further to the left of capitalism. And you can put them in different places on different issues, and you can pick out different people in the political process who are further to the left or further to the right. But no one really is all the way over at individual rights in America anymore. We have all moved toward the welfare state. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can argue. I think one of the things that has happened is that as you have economic stagnation, you have a greater fear in the society, and you have a more vociferous call for more collectivism because people feel so insecure. So it has a vicious cycle aspect to it. The real cure is to go toward individual rights, but people are fearful, and if you call for that, they are alarmed, and they would rather call for more collective responsibility, not seeing that it leads you into more economic stagnation through this government compulsion problem. The libertarians, if you want to place them, they'd be closer to individual rights. The Green Party and the Peace and Freedom are over here on the collectivist side. You can pick out individual politicians or individual government officials on any issue, and you can place them on this continuum. But the point I wanted to make about this is that it is a continuum. It's somewhere down this road. Every policy that we're looking at in America is somewhere on this continuum. The further we go toward collectivism, the more we stagnate. The more we go toward individual rights, the more we grow. And if you realize that, if you recognize that, you can analyze some of these proposals that sound very sweet in a more critical way. You can say, where is this going to take us? Look at some examples of collectivism in the United States. The Affordable Care Act is collectivism. It's the idea, and it was sold this way, that we're all in this together, and that everyone should pay a little more so that people who don't have anything can pay less and get something. It's the idea is young people will pay higher premiums. Some people will pay penalties if they're not participating. Everyone has a shared responsibility. It's collectivism. And I would argue that it's causing economic stagnation. I would argue that it's causing a lack of hiring around the country because we've asked businesses to share the responsibility, paying more for insuring their employees, paying for richer policies that end up making the total balance in the insurance books work, making the numbers work. They're looking at all these different ways to make it add up by making it a shared collective responsibility. And the result has been people have had their hours cut, full-time goes to part-time, part-time has the hours cut, there's less hiring, and it's all across the whole country at the same time. It's every sector, it's every region, it's every business. There's not enough hiring in America, and I would argue that the Affordable Care Act has directly caused that. There are, according to the Associated Press, I believe 4.7 million people who got letters canceling their policies. Now, they didn't all lose their insurance. Some of them had other policy options. They were probably more expensive. Some people went into the exchanges. And I think the last number I heard before they extended the opportunity to buy the canceled policies, it was about a million people had lost their insurance. And administration officials were going around telling everyone what a small percentage that was. It was a small percentage that had lost their policies. This is the sacrifice mentality. Now, it's not like tying someone to a rock on top of a mountain, but it's the idea that you can take these million individuals and sacrifice their well-being for all the other people who have needs, because this is good for all of us and we're all in this together. This is collectivism. This is where it takes you. It takes you to economic stagnation. There's no escape from it. Refundable tax credits, something you may not be familiar with. This is a form of redistribution of wealth that we have in our tax code. We have welfare through the tax code in this country. This is from the Intuit TurboTax page, 5 things you should know about refundable tax credits. Here at the bottom it says, with some of the larger refundable credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the amount of your refund can be substantial. This makes refundable credits some of the most valuable parts of your tax return. What does that mean? That means that if you're a low-income person and you don't pay very much in taxes, or you don't pay anything in taxes, you can get a tax refund check from the United States Treasury of thousands of dollars. Money that was paid in by somebody else, because you didn't pay it in. You're getting a refundable tax credit, which means even if you didn't pay it, you still get the refund. This is a wealth transfer. This is collectivism. This is the idea that there are some people who aren't doing so well, working families, they have expenses, they have needs, and then there are other people who are doing very well, they don't need everything they have, and it's the government's job, through the tax code, to distribute that money in a fair, equitable way. You can be for it or you can be against it, but recognize what it is. It's collectivism. It moves us a little further down that continuum toward government force, because the tax code is nothing if it's not force. Affirmative action is a collectivist idea. The idea that you can have a group of people based on race or gender or ethnicity, and you can give a job to 5 of those people, and that somehow benefits all the other people who share that race or gender or ethnicity. How does it benefit them? No one ever really answers that question. How does it benefit all people of a particular color if one person of a particular color gets a government contract from the Pentagon? No one really ever answers that question. It's a collectivist idea to do that. Affirmative action is group rights in the United States within our our legal structure of individual rights. It's probably not constitutional. It's always arguable at the Supreme Court. We get these divided decisions, 6-3, 7-2. Maybe we'll do it a little longer. We're not sure how long. Maybe we'll call it diversity. We're not really sure, but it's not really constitutional. The Constitution is based on individual rights, and affirmative action, however well-intentioned and however it might be perceived as necessary due to past wrongs, is not an individual rights concept. It's a collectivist concept. Sustainability is something we've heard a lot about. This is the EPA page. What is sustainability? Sustainability is based on a simple principle. It's a simple principle. Hang on to something. Everything we need for our survival and well-being depends on our natural environment. Sustainability creates and maintains the conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony. That's vague. This is the EPA. This is the federal government. They have all kinds of enforcement powers, all kinds of regulatory powers, all kinds of decision-making powers to stop things from happening, to force things to happen, to cost certain people a lot of money, to cost other people a lot of delays. And it's based on what exactly? This is a very collectivist idea, sustainability, that somehow there's this vague well-being of the whole earth that will be determined by bureaucrats, and then they will issue regulations that violate the rights of individual property owners. If you have land and it has water on it and a bird lands on the water, hang on to something, because it's not sustainable if that bird doesn't come back the second year, and you can be fined if you get rid of that pond and build anything on it. There have been Supreme Court cases about issues like this. It's a collectivist idea. All of environmentalism is based on the collectivist idea that there is a greater good which overrides individual rights. And once again, you can be for it or you can be against it, but recognize it, it's collectivism. It takes us further down the path toward government force. And you may be in favor of what they're being forceful about, but it's still government force. It's not individual rights. It's a step away from freedom. And if you go too far with it, you pay a very high price for stepping away from freedom. You pay the price, not just philosophically, of course, we are for freedom. But even if you weren't for freedom, you pay a price economically, because you're stagnating when you put the government in charge of screening everything that's going to be built in the whole country all the time on the basis of something vague like, what is it they called it? Humans and nature existing in productive harmony. Productive harmony is not a concept that you can get a lawyer to define for you, and it's certainly not in the Constitution, and it's nothing James Madison came up with. Productive harmony is a very vague standard on which to premise unlimited government power. This is an interesting rhetorical trick that I wanted to call to your attention. In 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave a speech famously known as the Four Freedoms speech. And the Four Freedoms, he saw a world in which everyone enjoyed freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. This is very tricky. First of all, he was talking about preventing wider world war. He was talking about having economic agreements with nations that would make them a healthy peacetime life for the inhabitants, and freedom from fear. This was the American military machine helping to secure the world. This was in January of 1941. Of course, we were engulfed in the war in December. But back here, when he was talking about these freedoms, this is language that has been used ever since to justify collectivism in economic policies in America. Freedom from want, freedom from fear. There's no limit to that. That's not a political right. A political right is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is action of a person not restricted by the government. The freedom to speak, unrestricted. Freedom from want, putting it in this list, makes that sound like a political right. But that's a political right to have your needs met, and that's collectivism. Is there a political right in the United States, in a free country, to have your needs met? And if there is, who's responsible for meeting them, and what about their rights? So let's look for, just for example, in the medical business, if you have a right to health care, you have a right to be free from the fear of bankruptcy from medical bills. Does that mean that a doctor has an obligation to treat you at a loss? Does that mean that someone has an obligation to attend medical school if they don't want to, so we have enough doctors? At what point does the government force stop so that people can be free from the fear of becoming ill and not being able to pay for the care? At what point does the government force stop if people can't pay the bills for their family? Where do we draw that line? Because wherever we draw it, we're going to be called cruel and inhuman when someone comes up to it and isn't quite at the level where we're going to pay for it. We're always going to be cruel and inhuman for drawing the line anywhere. But if you go all the way to communism, what happens? You have economic stagnation and there isn't enough for anyone. What has happened in China? China has terrible rural poverty. China has a one-child policy. What do we hear in California? China has a bullet train. China has a bullet train and we don't. So they obviously are doing something right and we're doing something wrong. That's a very frightening thing to hear in the United States of America, that people don't understand in our government that China has a one-child policy. Which one of your children are you willing to give up so that there can be a bullet train? Anybody?
Yeah, but it's no more. They just changed it recently.
No, they changed it partially. They changed it partially. I think people, if you're an only child yourself, you may be given permission. You may be given permission. That is an oppressive government. That is government coercion, government force. That's not a free country. And this is where this kind of thing takes you. If you go all the way to communism, you wind up with not enough for anybody because it causes economic stagnation. And communist countries can live on the surplus from capitalism if we help them. If we help them with trade and hard currency and whatever else. And if they come part of the way toward individual rights, then they will have some prosperity and they can live off of that. But ideologically, if you take it to its logical conclusion, if you believe that freedom from want is a right, there is no end to what the government can do to anybody to provide for everybody else's needs as directed by the government. Philosophically, that's very different than what our country was founded on. Our country was founded on freedom of speech, on individual rights, on the rights of action of individuals, not on freedom from want. There's nothing in the Constitution about providing for people's needs. Not health care, not food, not housing. There's nothing in there about it. It's about rights. It's about limited government and freedom. That's what our country was founded on. And we should think very, very carefully before we throw that aside because something sounds good, because we're persuaded that there's a need and it's only generous. We can be as generous as we want to be. What we're talking about here is government force. Government force. And I want to show you, these are some quotations from various politicians who shall be nameless. Now it's true that those at the top, even in those years, talking about the 1950s, claimed a much larger share of income than the rest. The top 10% consistently took home about 1/3 of our national income. Our national income. This is a collectivist phrase. It's not our national income if you work. If you set the alarm clock and you go to the job and you do the work, it's your income. It's not our income. And this is a collectivist way of looking at things. This is the kind of phrase you would use to justify refundable tax credits, for instance, to take some of our national income and redistribute it to people who aren't doing as well, who are working hard but they're not doing as well. It's a collectivist idea. Once again, you can be in favor of it or you can be against it, but you have to recognize what it is. It's different than individual rights. We have to make sure the people with more money help the people with less money. Now, we have to make sure, you're sitting around your kitchen table talking to people, that's fine. If you're in the government, we have to make sure is the language of government force. And once again, we have to recognize it. You can be in favor of welfare programs, you can be in favor of generous private donations. Recognize that when it's government force, it's a different animal. And we pay a very high price in economic stagnation and loss of freedom for going too far down that path. I wanted to call this to your attention because this shows how much compulsion is involved in collectivism. Look, I've never believed that government can solve every problem or should, and neither do you. So don't worry, as if to say, don't worry, okay? We know that ultimately our strength is grounded in our people. Individuals out there striving, working, making things happen. Now you see, this is where you're going to get the surplus from capitalism in order to pay for the collectivist programs, because we're going down that path, down the continuum toward collectivism. Somebody's got to work or there isn't going to be any money. So very grateful that we have people out there striving and working. Set those alarm clocks. People are counting on you. It depends on community. Our strength depends on community, a rich and generous sense of community. Set those alarm clocks, get those paychecks, pay those taxes. People are counting on you. And look at all the compulsion that's involved here. To turn back rising inequality requires parents taking responsibility for their kids, kids taking responsibility to work hard. How is that enforced? Who does that? We're not sure. We're not sure how that happens. It requires religious leaders who mobilize their congregations to rebuild neighborhoods block by block. It requires voluntary work. It requires it. It requires civic organizations that can help train the unemployed and link them with businesses. It requires civic organizations. It's compulsion and compulsion and compulsion. It requires companies and CEOs to set an example by providing decent wages and salaries and benefits. So it requires companies to pay more money. It requires private business owners to pay more than they otherwise would in order to turn back inequality. We know that's our strength, our people, our communities, our businesses. But in recognition that all this compulsion isn't going to do it, but government can't stand on the sidelines in our efforts. Well, what does that mean exactly? Nobody really knows. It's some kind of compulsion. It's something that somebody's going to have to enforce through the IRS or someplace. Somebody's going to have to enforce something, because all of this compulsion in the society isn't going to be enough to turn back inequality. We also need government force. George Washington said government is not rhetoric. Government is force. And here it is. Force in the service of reducing inequality, which we will look at a little further here. This is a quote from a mayor. We do not ask more of the wealthy to punish success. We do it to create more success stories. What I'd like to call your attention to here is that they're not asking. They're just telling you. They're just raising the taxes. They're just taking it. The promise of American life, this is a different person, rests on this basic bargain. All of us should have the opportunity to live up to our God-given potential and the responsibility to make the most of it. This makes the EPA sustainability look really focused and specific. What exactly is our God-given potential? Who determines whether people have had the opportunity to live up to it? What if they haven't? This is a government official saying this. Exactly what is meant by it. And who made this bargain? That's not in the Constitution. There's no bargain in the Constitution about God-given potential or responsibility. The Constitution is about limiting the power of the government so people can be free, so they can be happy. That's what our country was founded on. That's what built the United States. That's our legacy. That's our heritage. That's what we have to fight to retain against these sweet-sounding statements that people have responsibilities so that everyone can enjoy whatever it is that they're handing out to them. James Madison, in case you had any doubt, did not really think too much of this kind of thing. I found this interesting because he was speaking about how democracy, we are a republic, as they pointed out at the time, if we can keep it. We are a republic. We are not a pure democracy. James Madison said, such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. That's the governments he's talking about, democratic governments that have been founded and have not succeeded. Theoretic politicians who have patronized this species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would at the same time be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions. This is the 18th century. This is the 18th century. There is nothing new under the sun. We are seeing that now. Theoretic politicians who think, well, if we have equality of political rights, it should be leading us to equality of everything else. And here's James Madison saying that not only is this wrong, but this is the cause of free government failing and being replaced by autocracies. And here's another one. This is also from Federalist number 10. He's explaining how a republic would check the problems of factionalism. in the government. And one example that he gives of problems that you might have from factions, ideas that would be coming up from factions: a rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project. Improper or wicked. We've got all those things. All those things are taking our freedom. Paper money is one way that government officials can manipulate the value of your savings, and it can be used as a form of theft when your currency is devalued. Debt, we have tremendous debt which enslaves us, our next generation, our generation after that, to pay taxes, to continuously pay for things that have been in the past. They're not going to have any vote about it, they just owe it. Debt is a way that property rights are seized, that freedom is seized. And the equal division of property. Let there be no question about it. When the framers wrote about equality, they were not writing about the equal division of property, they were writing about equality before the law. And one is not the same as the other. And when you get back to that continuum, and you start at individual rights and you move toward collectivism for the good of everyone, it doesn't end well. These are the absolute rights of individuals that are our heritage. This is what the United States was founded on: life, liberty, property. This is the quote that Doris read earlier from Adolf Hitler. It sounds so sweet. It sounds so sweet. The individual should come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation, that the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interests of the nation as a whole. You can make that sound sweet. And Adolf Hitler did. It doesn't end well. It ends with government coercion. It ends with government force. It ends very badly. Sacrifices for the community end very badly. It's nothing we shouldn't take seriously. We have to fight for our heritage. Our heritage. We are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Freedom is the quality or state of being free, the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. Liberation from slavery or restraint or from the power of another. Independence. The Declaration of Independence is not a dusty, musty, old document written by the dead hand of the 18th century. It is the foundation of our freedom. It is the foundation of our prosperity. It is the foundation of our future if we will fight for it. Thank you.